served until we're done. But after the lecture, we'll have the drinks and food and discussion. Tonight, we're extremely pleased to be able to welcome Farshid Moussavi to UIC. We've been excited about getting here for a while in Hoster, so we're glad that it finally worked out. She received her architectural diploma from the Bartlett School in London and her MR2 from Harvard's GSD. After working at the Renzo Piano Building Studio in Genoa and the Office for Metropolitan Architecture, Farshid co-founded Foreign Office Architects in 1992, and soon after won the competition for the Yokohama Port Terminal, which is probably one of the most influential and copied projects of the last 20 years, and one that would consume the young office for over 8 years. So be careful what you win at the beginning, because it's going to take a long time. In 2011, Farshid founded her solo practice in London, Farshid Moussavi Architecture, FMA. Currently, FMA is working on a museum in Tehran, a residential complex in La Défense, Paris, an office in London, and 2 years ago opened the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland. Just last month, for our fans of fashion and football, FMA opened the first retail store for Victoria Beckham in London. Since 2006, Farshid has been a professor in practice at Harvard and has previously taught at the AA in London, the Berlin Institute, the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, Columbia, Princeton, UCLA, and other places. She is a columnist for Architectural Review, a member of the board of trustees for both the Whitechapel Gallery and the London Architecture Foundation, and is a member of the Mayor of London's Design for London Advisory Group. All of these activities testify to Farshid's commitment to advancing research in the discipline, specifically through combining previous static models, you could say, of the office and the academy, and which has really been among her signal contribution in architecture, thinking about architectural practice itself as the source and inspiration, as a source of speculation. This is evidenced by her 2 books, The Form of Ornament and The Form of Function, which produce and provide a genealogy for her persistent efforts to sort of put the form in performance and to uncover design strategies that overcome the binary opposition of top-down versus bottom-up in thinking about architecture's relationship with part-whole economies. Always a pleasure to hear Farshid on the work in those themes, so please join me in welcoming Farshid.
For giving me the opportunity to be here, present my, let's say, latest thoughts, and to be in Chicago in such a beautiful time of the year. I thought that I would share parts of my kind of upcoming new book that grew out of research and teaching at Harvard. It is called The Function of Style. It investigates how we can define style today and how might style have agency or function. Now, I'll read a little bit because it will go faster. Now, in terms of definition, style has historically been the word employed to identify an individual architect's school or to indicate some common features in a place or a period. Embedded within this usage are several dubious and conflicting assumptions. Firstly, that style consists in the repetition of formal elements, in other words, sameness, which does not exist in contemporary architecture. Second, that style is the product of an individual personality or intellect, given the widespread dissemination of ideas in contemporary architectural cultures through the internet, as well as more traditional media. This is quite unlikely. Third, that style relates to something larger and less tangible than the actual buildings which embody it. In other words, the function of style is representation, which implies that buildings are signs to be read, a point of view that ignores the actual presence of built forms in aesthetic experience and therefore the way they are assembled. Now, more recently, very recently, Crampul has stated, no architect, I quote it now, no architect in the right mind would dare to write today an elements of architecture that intended to describe both what the components of architecture are and how they should be put together. But the architect's role is to put elements together in a certain way, refuting the notion of finding ideals, such as, say, the 5 points of architecture, does not mean abandoning the question of how and why architects assemble built forms. How then can architects make a difference in people's daily lives? After all, tying ourselves around a tree or sticking a solar panel on a building are not architectural ways to make a difference to people's thinking about the environment or the economy. The function research investigates the assembly of architectural material as the core of an architecture agency. It investigates how, using the practical matters of everyday life as the raw materiality of architecture, grounds the assembly of buildings and therefore their aesthetic experience in everyday life rather than in the search for ideals. Each built form, as you see here, that serves a use in daily life comprises a myriad of elements that can be assembled differently. There are also numerous experts that provide the architect with diverse inputs. Nevertheless, it continues to be the architect that assembles all those elements into a coherent form and determines what is traversable or intraversable, audible or inaudible, open or closed, touchable or untouchable, visible or invisible, fixed or movable, transparent or opaque, with colors, geometries, and structures which are present, and in doing so determines the aesthetic presence of built forms. The cluster of affects that spreads directly out of their thisness. Here is the envelope of a phrase, less the cineplex, which transmits reflectivity, glare, and deformation, so that rather than ignoring the cineplex, as is often the case with such inward-looking buildings, at a couple of points around the building, passers-by stop and salute the building systematically, no matter what sex or age. This was not part of our brief or practical demands of the building, yet it is a consequence of the way we assembled the cineplex in response to those demands. Consider the Smithsonian East Wing by Iron Pale, whose untouchable artifacts housed within are counterparted by its seductive blade-like walls, whose affects of sharpness is so inviting that visitors have touched its sharp edges so that they have been partly worn away. Or the low-lying handrail of the Guggenheim Museum, which invites people to recline on it, with the result that people who might otherwise pass quickly through a museum as if they were walking along the aisles of a supermarket, stop and lean on the handrail as they look at the art. The cladding, walls, and handrails of these projects are not added to a functional structure. They act as functional elements. The envelope houses multiple dark cinemas, the walls shield the art in galleries within from external weather. The handrails stop people from falling into the atrium while also acting as the source for a unique aesthetic experience. These aesthetic experiences are the result of a dynamic interaction between the physical assemblage produced by the architect and the individuals appropriating it. They are generated not by individuals perceiving building as facts, but as a thing in the world that transmits particular cluster of affects as they move through them, participate in their activities, etc. And those cluster of affects do not signify the meaning in the sense of communication. They exist like a language prior to words, making sense of which, in a particular context, will create different tacit knowledge and unthought associations, which in turn influence the way people think and act in relationship to the everyday life around them and the different meanings they come to attribute to it. Built forms may not signify anything, but there is no doubt that they are a platform for people who encounter them, especially since they are always experienced in the context of a specific activity or use. And as they are repeated over time, certain conventions of assembly evolve, such as seating arrangements for watching a film in a cinema, which lead to habits of behavior in the people who use them, as for instance in the different thoughts and habits of behavior prompted by people using this arrangement of seats in a cinema, as opposed to this one. This arrangement is not a more ideal way to watch a film, rather by creating a break from the conventional way of which watching a movie in a cinema, even at a micro scale, it frees people from a way of perceiving the cinema which has become so habitual that it seems almost inevitable. The style research investigates this as the agency of architects. How? By reconfiguring conventions of arrangements, architects can generate new encounters between people and daily life activities and invite them to form new assemblages with them, the experience of which leads to their perception, understanding, or know-how. For example, rather than simply passing through a ferry terminal, people might use it as a place to sit down and paint. The architect's role is not to determine or design an ideal ferry terminal, which is impossible anyway, since each individual will perceive and experience it differently, but rather by disrupting the conventions associated with the building for traveling to free them from creatively respond to it rather than simply habitually react. So too, the architect's role cannot be to determine an ideal way, these are pages from the style book, that people should use their private balconies in a communal apartment building, but rather by changing the conventional arrangements of balconies in such buildings to disrupt habits of using such private outdoor spaces for new ones, or through the play between the conventions of arrangements of atriums in tall office buildings and the production of new ones, engage the politics of workplace, away from introversion, cellularization, and standardization to transparency, communication, and complexification, or by making different choices regarding the assembly of galleries in a museum to alter the conventions associated with viewing art. The style book investigates how architects can, by appropriating ideas from each other, not only by past representation, but also ground architecture in the micropolitics of everyday life rather than ideas. We could then say that the agency of architects is not to directly determine people's reactions, but rather to disrupt conventions. And in order to pursue this agency, architects need to identify the physical elements that in each architectural assemblage or form are conventional, and to alter those elements as to generate new clusters of affects. With this in mind, I'm going to show you now some projects focusing on the elements that are engaged each time and why. So, just to make sure that this is not understood as a new manifesto, and that it is actually what I believe is at the core of architectural practice. The Yokohama Port Terminal subverted the monumentality of conventional port terminals that contributes to their isolation from daily life, to integrate them into the landscape of the city's harbor and forge openness. The elements employed this time are the circulation system, which promotes, instead of efficiency that is found in terminals, a series of interlocking routes so that people would meander. The structure, which instead of a typical coastal beam that usually generates cellularity, is designed as a long span steel structure that leads to openness and flexibility, pleating and arching, as well as interior-exterior continuity, reinforced by the use of only three material elements or finishes other than the steel structure, and the usage of these throughout the interior and exterior blurs the distinction between the two. The immigration borders are designed on wheels, inverting them from fixtures to mobile elements, so that the terminal is embedded with aspects of mobility and ephemerality. This again means that the terminal can be cleared out and used for unconventional uses, such as pop concerts as seen here, and many other gatherings of small and large scale, car shows, beer festivals, etc., outdoor concerts, or, for example, as we saw earlier, just sitting down to make drawings. Such examples reflect the style of the terminal and the way by shifting the affects away from the monumental terminal that transmits isolation, efficiency, cellularity, interiority, predictability, to a new terminal that transmits integration with the urban context, meandering, openness, interior-exterior continuity, variety, unpredictability. It has not altered only the way people think about travel, but has inspired them to break the conventional relationship with the physical environment of the terminal. Now, the John Lewis department store is another one of these projects that questions conventions. This time, the blankness that comes with department stores, exterior envelope that it is blank in order to maximize display area, minimize visual distraction, avoid exposing clutter of changing displays to the exterior. But as a result also disconnects people's experience of, let's say, shopping from the context and transmits a sense of introversion and also permanence. So if not a blank envelope, how should the presence of a department store be articulated? And what difference would that make to people who shop in it? The store engages the envelope subverting that blackness into semi-transparency, as if it is like, let's say, a net curtain. This envelope is designed with a pattern at a particular scale that not only provides certain energy efficiency through the opacity that it brings to the glass, but also ensures that when doubled in layer, there is semi-transparency through the two layers. You can see through, as you see here, or you could say translucency, connecting people within to the exterior context. Here is a typical bedding department of our department store, totally artificially lit. Here in Leicester, the bedding department is naturally lit. From the exterior, the two layers at an oblique fill each other's gap, the gaps in the pattern, and the pattern transmits an effect of, let's say, privacy. It becomes twice as dense. Therefore, concealing the clutter behind. There are a whole series of other decisions that are made in order to minimize, let's say, the presence of structure, to generate an effect of lightness to the envelope, to minimize the presence of the grid of glass panels by producing 4 variations of the pattern that can combine and transmit seamlessness and embroidery instead. The pattern is applied to the glass in a mirror finish, which results in the envelope transmitting effects of lightness by the day, heaviness as if it is made of iron or arabesque at night, and multivalence. Now, this assemblage of mirror frits, steel bolts, glass and spandrel panels, steel hangers, glass catwalks and lights gives the department store an unconventional aesthetic experience. And in my opinion, our agency was to deliberately challenge how people's experience of this kind of building has shifted away from the blank sealed box to an object that is embedded in its context, changes offering different experiences. Now, onto the new, let's say, office. Two new residential projects. This one is in Paris, adjacent to the Grand Axe. So if I can maybe come to it, you will just see it next to the big building in front, which we engaged to question the lack of privacy in communal residential buildings, which results from the arrangement of units around an internal circulation corridor. So you have one long corridor with the core in the center. The single aspect units that result transmit darkness, stuffiness, whilst the internal corridor transmits endlessness and fear and intrusion as you go past other people's front door. The structure is often inflexible, and therefore residents cannot change their interior over time to adapt it to their changing lifestyle. When they do provide outdoor space, they are usually small and exposed rather than private. So to avoid the single aspect units as well as the internal corridor, we arranged a slab divided laterally into units that profit from natural light at both ends and therefore also cross ventilation. And every 2 units shares a core, a circulation core, which means that the units are embedded with ample privacy because they only share a small landing. The core spacing is also used as structural lines of support, and then there is just one additional line of columns, and everything else is non-load bearing, and therefore the units are embedded with, one would say, extreme flexibility and freedom to be rearranged over time. The double aspect apartments provide residents with lateral views of the site context in order to provide them also with longitudinal view, which is really the biggest asset of this site being next door to the Grand Axe. We rotated every floor by 2 degrees away or towards the void of the axe. This generates balconies of different sizes, but also of different orientations, because every other floor is rotated in the opposite direction to the one below. giving residents a choice of whether you up the axe or down the axe. Now the rotation also generates an effect of twisting and a step silhouette to the building and an asymmetry to each apartment as every floor, since every unit crosses through, every floor is on one side covered by the floor, by the unit above, and exposed on the other side. This asymmetry is used to provide each apartment with an open, with an inset balcony at one end and a protruding loggia at other ends, so an open space on both ends. On one side, and since every other floor is covered by the floor above, it means that in terms of sun shading, louvers, every other floor can be just glass. And therefore, every unit that crosses through has glass only on one side and on the other side, glass but with a layer of shutters in front. This gives you these two conditions. These are the two ends. They are kind of not beautiful images, but they're kind of illustrative of the idea that these are two ends of a single unit. And so two different kinds of outdoor spaces which are reinforced as spaces that reinforce openness and continuity with the exterior. On this side, for example, by a glass handrail that has no vertical metal divisions. And on the other side with the loggia, you see that there is a different handrail design, and the loggia and it's kind of the different elements that define it are being designed to reinforce that sense of perhaps more interiority. Now this alternate treatment of the glazed and screened floors separates or distinguishes one floor from the one below and embeds the building with an affect of axiality, you could say, something that is perhaps very much part of the kind of the sensation of the grand axe that this building fronts. To vary the perception of the slab from different orientations, the sliding screens are designed as aluminium extrusions clad in a dichroic film that changes color from blue to pink owing to the orientation of the floors, as well as the orientation of people as they approach the building. This again distinguishes the floors from each other and triggers effects of differentiation rather than uniformity that is typical in slab buildings. Therefore, the La Défense complex will enable, hopefully, residents to occupy it in different and unconventional ways. Now, this is another residential building we're working on in the city of Montpellier, in the south of France, that enjoys warm weather throughout the year, and therefore the use of your outdoor balcony is the outdoor balcony is much more part of one's everyday life, and so we have questioned the lack of privacy generally in balconies. It focuses this project on visual balconies. Since Montpellier, as I said, is in Montpellier, people use balconies actively. This seemed for us to be, let's say, relevant in the particular context, starting from a compact floor plate that minimizes the gain internal circulation. These are 4 units having a very small landing between them, so they benefit from privacy internally. They are corner units, so they have 2 aspects, and they have these L-shaped balconies to begin with. Now, when you have obviously 2 balconies next to each other, generally there are these dividing walls that separate one neighbor to another, but they also interrupt lateral views out of the balconies. Now, the Marina Towers, or 2 Chicago towers, are 2 residential buildings. These happen to be very tall towers, but they have questioned the dividing wall, and the dividing wall doesn't exist in either one. Each unit has a unique balcony of its own, so that the wall has gone. However, and I, by the way, just to say, I mean, I like very much both projects. These are, the conversations are, let's say, academic. There are lateral views from one unit to the another, so you could argue that they don't quite work in terms of privacy, as one neighbor overlooks the other. Of course, this situation is increased even more in the Aqua Tower because of the lengths. The balconies are very large, they're very generous, and therefore there is more length to see your neighbor from. And also the curvilinear outdoor spaces sit in distinction to a rectilinear interior. So they are considered and designed as two distinct spaces. The stacking of the balconies, this is now back to the Marina Towers, creates overlooking of neighbors, downwards also, which further compromises people's privacy. You can see your neighbor down. Now, to eliminate the dividing walls, we started shaping the balconies so that the shape of the balcony does the job of the wall. But of course, this only got us to the issue of lateral overlooking. Now, also, the corner balconies are not adequately communicated. You have two balconies instead of one. So the shape of the balcony and the interior outline of the interior are changed so that the corner balcony is communicated with a single one. Then we rotate the exterior profile of the building and the limit of the interior so that no two balconies overlook each other. As you see here, it is impossible when you're in one balcony to see the other neighbor. So you're outside, as you see here, and no one can see you. And the apartment, as a result, also, the interior and the exterior are in sync. They are both working with the curvilinear geometry, and they are implicated by this, the interior and exterior kind of invading each other at different moments along the length of each unit. Now, in order to reduce downward overlooking, the single floor plate is mirrored on itself twice, so that the same floor plate provides balconies with different orientation. And when these are stacked, we have 8 floors, so each floor repeats twice. 2 of the balconies of each floor align with the floor above, and 2 of them don't. And therefore, 2 of the balconies are, let's say, covered and are more like an inset balcony, and 2 of them are exposed. So this is a balcony that is recessed and covered by the one above. This is one where, the floor above you is 2 floors above and is exposed to the sun. Here, the covered balconies are shown in dark gray, and the open exposed ones are shown in light gray. The red are structure, which continues vertically, so the curvilinear form, in fact, has a kind of quite a conventional structural walls that carry on. That, together with the core, act as a load-bearing structure, and everything else is non-load-bearing. So again, flexibility is embedded into the kind of the little tower, so that units can be rearranged over time. Now, this assemblage, as I said earlier, increases the distance between the balconies along the section. This is if we had simply stacked the balconies and not kind of rotated them. As you see the neighbor below, and this is the consequence of them as a result of the rotation. It is not so easily possible to see the neighbor below. Now, there is kind of an extra measure of privacy, given whether you want to introduce curtains, but I think this is kind of contingent to the exercise. Which then, due to the rotation of the balconies, covered balconies, the curtain spirals around the building. Now, the double height balcony is instead left open. Now, as a result of this assemblage of floors and balconies, a whole series of choices generate beyond those that, say, the prospective residents would normally be presented with, because you have no choice of only apartment sizes, but also of balconies of different shapes, balconies of different orientations. whether they are open or covered, whether they are single or double height. This is, I think, one of the ways in which we manage to, let's say, influence how people work, or not work, live in a residential building away from simple repetition and possibly monotony. Some exterior images of it, of the kind of the vertical differentiation that and the multi-directionality that generates. Now the next project is a 17-story office building, which is in design development. I would like to talk about just the curtain wall. It's an irregular shaped site. The site is in the city of London, in the financial district. Now, it is an irregular shaped site, given the kind of the pressure of building in the city of London and land values. It needs to fill its site entirely, so it wasn't really it's more a, let's say a street building than a tall high rise. Now, ever since Mises' visionary conceptual projects of the 1920s for crystalline glass towers, office buildings have been, let's say, subjected to the pursuit of disappearance and through transparency. The glass curtain walls, we see these through reflection. For example, here this is like typical downtown office buildings. Glass is used also as either as a window or as a mirror, and in both cases it's treated as a passive surface that is supposed to disappear and not change anything to the context. But of course it never disappears, because a glass curtain wall, whether it's a stick system or a unitized system, it brings horizontal and vertical caps or mullions, silicone joints, expansion joints, as well as different shading devices which appear darker than the glass and remain visible. Such glass buildings therefore transmit endlessness and, we say, efficiency as a consequence of the grid that covers them, as well as anonymity, as the reflection makes them a mirror of everything around them. Now, Mies proposed those first glass towers. He was probably more interested in the lightness of construction in steel and glass, I would say, than the idea of making them disappear. In fact, when in 1958 he got the chance to finally build one, he didn't instigate disappearance at all, but a very specific presence for the office tower. He attached a vertical decorative bronze high-profile beams to the curtain wall. Mullions to suggest structure and weight. He attached bronze plates to floor edges and chose the glazing in a whiskey brown tint to embed the tower with an overall sense of warmth. So it was not at all a project of disappearance. So if the office building is not to be the generic curtain wall, how should its presence be articulated, we asked. So we are exploring not a kind of a flat curtain wall, but a concave pieces of glass that produce a kind of vertical fluting. And instead of simply mirroring the context, the fluting compresses reflections of the context and produces new imagery. It also disconnects the curtain wall therefore from the idea of disappearance. It dissolves the corner at street level and flattens the sense of perspective. Therefore, the mass of the building recedes and the curtain wall gains presence. To generate variety in people's experience as they move around the building, the scale of the fluting is varied across the faces of the building. This will generate different scales of compression of the reflections on the different building faces. It also helps to accommodate the irregularities of the site footprint. For passers-by, the glass width will appear to change depending on one's point of view, due to the foreshortening of the width of glass pieces in perspective, therefore in place of the absoluteness of the grid. Perhaps here the curtain wall will be less determinate. In addition, of course, the fluting of the curtain wall allows for differentiation of interior spaces. Now, in order to diminish the presence of the frames, and therefore the grid, The glass panels are assembled with a structurally glazed reveal, as you see here, to allow glass and glass to be separated by a shadow. And we have also interrogated the 9-meter conventional column grid, which is usually conventionally kept independent of the curtain wall. The large columns introduce constraints in office planning. Instead, we are developing a system where the structure and the curtain wall are brought together, and the structure is organized also at 3-meter intervals, and the reduction of the size of the columns substantially frees up the interior area taken up otherwise by structure. On the east and the west sides, this also starts acting like a brise-soleil, stopping the sun from coming in at low level and therefore avoiding glare, which are very much part of what makes, I think, also what a good workplace place to work in. If the interior was structured with the 9-meter columns, it would transmit affects of weight concentrated at these 9-meter distant columns, whereas with the 3-meter structural grid, it transmits lightness, as with the since the weight is distributed at every glazing mullion. Also, the two options will be experienced very differently from the exterior. The conventional column grid leads to an appearance of heavy grid on the exterior, whereas the 3-meter grid takes that away. And the tower structure dissolves as part of the curtain wall, and the floors will appear to be almost cantilever from the core. Now, to make the structurally glazed reveals dissolve, the glass will be frit in a black color, gradating to clear areas in the center of each flute. Blackness will also reduce the tonality in the reflected images. Black glass has been used by painters in the late 80s and 19th century to turn away from the geometric to physiological optics by reducing and simplifying the color and tonal range of scenes into a subtle gradation of tones. And Reinhardt's black paintings have also tried to eliminate the symbolics through the absence of color. This is Gerhard Richter, who uses black mirror for abstraction or repicturing a natural world. So here with the black fluted curtain wall, comparing what this is as if it would be flat, and that's the fluted. Obviously, the fluted doesn't show the context in front. It reduces the tonality of its reflection, mutes it. It also compresses and repeats it many times, making it unfamiliar. And as opposed to a flat curtain wall that almost disappears against the sky, the serrated edge of the top of the curtain wall will reinforce the building's presence and distinction against the sky. It will literally invite your eye to explore. At street level, the different scales of fluting will invite people to explore all of its sides to fully comprehend the curtain wall as it reveals different imagery. The tighter the fluting, the more number of times the context is repeated. Therefore, the fluted surface defies definition because it never stops changing. We could say it is a surface caught up in a kind of a process of continuous process of becoming. Unlike a conventional glass tower, which transmits disappearance, it will transmit effects of glaring, variety, reflectivity, muteness, compression, distortion, tonality, unfamiliarity. Now these, in order to comprehend them, let's say we have to engage with the tower in different ways, and certainly I think it challenges our common sense of what a glass office building should be like. Now the next project is the Museum of Contemporary Art. In Cleveland, MoCA wanted to become a home for the diverse community in the university circle area of Cleveland, so we questioned the conventions that tend to unify the experience of art museums. Firstly, the White Cube Gallery, which in most contemporary museums treats all contemporary art in the same way. Secondly, its separation from the non-art spaces for commercial and educational programs, which means that the art museum is not a flexible configuration, and that the experience of art is separated from the museum at large. To sustain the museum as a destination independent of the galleries, the museum has become typically designed with spectacular features such as colossal atriums that are devoid of any art. Now, as a non-collecting gallery for contemporary art, which of course ranges in medium, subject matter, we felt MoCA needed spaces that transmitted diversity in scale. Here are 250 artworks scaled from nano to giga scale. Diversity in lighting, you see here light needs for artificial light versus natural light. Climatic needs, the one on the right is a group that requires no artificial climate, so can be in normal air, and this really questions the current conventions around the White Wood Gallery. This diversity in terms of display possibilities, you see that we've come to understand contemporary art or museums by walls, but actually most contemporary art uses the floor. So this really diversity, this extreme diversity that is required really is a challenge for a museum today. Of how to provide this amount of diversity, or you could say complexity, in a museum, not so much in a kind of a static scenario as we find in the Guggenheim Bilbao, a very, very different scale to what we had to do, but as a flexible configuration. And in order to address this, we started to first ask, well, can art and social spaces not cohabit? Can we not design the entire museum for art and let the other non-art uses of the museum occupy it at other times? For example, Carsten Haller's work, which you see here, has proves that a gallery space can be shared with an event. Now, in the case of MoCA, we try to engage its floors, entrances, stairs, envelopes, the elements that we were to, let's say, assemble to provide these changing scenarios over time. The entry floor is designed in a hexagonal shape so that it would have multiple entrances and allow it to be divided on the lower level into distinct areas. Not all shows are large, and some shows would be better suitable to be entered directly from the street. Imagine a Roscoe Chapel on the entry floor, and a large show on the fourth floor of the museum using a different entrance. Now the top floor is designed with a rectangular shape that can divide into smaller spaces. Now these two define the museum form, which then is further differentiated by the use of structure. A light, long span structure at the top makes the top floor most suitable for the larger exhibition gallery, whereas lower levels that are encumbered by dividing walls are designed for the smaller exhibition and event spaces. Now the transition between these two floors produces these slanted walls along the perimeter, which is exposed fully at one point when this main circulation spec cuts through to provide access to the four floors. The large staircase provides, this is not a real view, but if we would take the kind of two of the sides away, it is larger than what it would normally be, because one of the egress stairs is stacked under it, partially to save space. And also because we have no vertical lines to climb up. And now this double-decker stair that results subverts the typical linearity of a stair by giving visitors 10 different ways, open and closed, to climb between the floors of the museum. It also subverts the conventional museum stair as an object to be viewed from a single point or from several points in the building, it's actually impossible to see in its entirety the stair at MoCA from any one point of view. To experience it, visitors have to move through the stair, where they discover it both as a social space as well as a sound gallery. The closed route, which is used as a sound gallery, is painted all yellow to invert the sense of boundedness that comes with this very tight stair that is climbing up and twisting around. A constant intensity of yellow is provided all over that dematerializes the space, removes any measure, makes it scaleless, we could say widthless. It is actually quite difficult to judge the depth of its space. The perception of unending space results, challenges visual perception of space, and for sure it is disorientating, and the handrail is highly used. Sound then becomes the main focus, which is what is being performed in the space. Now, whereas the interior route doubles as a sound gallery, the upper route doubles up as a social space. It unveils itself slowly as the stair leans forward as it climbs, following the leaning profile of the building. Landings are made larger intentionally so that they will become these collective spaces for socializing. As you see also here, the stair extends above the main gallery, at which point simultaneous views of the museum's social spaces as well as the gallery is provided. For me, the stair is one of those elements in the building that has agency. It provides visitors with multiple perceptions of what a museum is. It is a space that is at once individual and collective. It's also a space for display, but it's a space also of production, the production of exhibitions. Now, to further ensure that art spaces and non-art spaces cohabit, there are quite a number of switch elements that are introduced into the kind of the main form of the building, and these are mobile. I won't go through them, but all the reds that are indicated on these plans are switch elements that gives at least a double function to some of these spaces. The ground floor has most of them because it can reconfigure most over time. These are scenarios of the ground floor over time. Of course, only if you visit the museum many times you will become aware of this, but it makes a huge difference to the operation of the museum. So this is a kind of a complexity that unveils over time. This is one modest space on the ground floor where there are these display cases that are tucked into the wall and can move out very quickly to unveil the museum store. This is used quite often in this sense. Other times, the space is used for a performance art, and the arch receiving area, which is intentionally made in glass, the division between these two spaces, doubles up as a stage. Or the receiving area, which is concealed behind the kind of the mirror-clad exterior, doubles up when the truck is not delivering as a little outdoor theater. The guillotine door that you see in gray here divides the ground floor into a social space and a lobby, or turns them into a single continuous one. This is, the stair that doubles up as a venue for performances. So these are series of elements that allow art and social spaces to cohabit in different ways. Now, the envelope we're looking at so far, the interior, the envelope of the building is also used to shift the convention of inside-outside continuity in contemporary museums. It is deliberately designed as a light steel structure whose exterior and interior are consistent but different to each other. The exterior is clad in strips of stainless steel that continue diagonally from face to face, avoiding vertical orientation so as to define the sense of gravity and weight. Single panels are bent around the corner to reinforce the diagonal banding, and running one pattern is used again to reduce the presence of other orientations. The panels have to change width in order to keep this continuity, diagonal continuity, and all of this has to negotiate with manufacturing limits, which is super kind of exciting, but not to discuss in detail now. And long, narrow windows follow the diagonal geometry of the metal strips, irrespective of the floors within, and so the presence of the floors is concealed from the exterior in order to embed the exterior with a sense of scalelessness, in addition to a sense of lightness. To introduce the dimension of time and affect of transience, the stainless steel panels are designed with a black mirror finish. This ensures that the exterior is not a static field of black, but rather a constantly shifting surface, a highly engineered surface with acute tolerances when the strips come together, but inside every strip with intentionally designed a kind of an oil canning effect, resulting in this sense of indeterminate depth to the cladding surface. So refractions of the context result rather than mirror reflections. The exterior stretches the context, compresses it, refigures it, delays it, displaces it, multiplies it, and also projects the sun onto the pavement in the shape of circular hoops of light, producing a kind of a transient landscape at times. This act between the envelope and the context changes constantly. When the stark materiality of the black surface appears, the cladding strips pick up the light of the surrounding envelope differently owing to the microsectional variation in their depth. At other times, the different orientations of the faces act by alternately reflecting the sky or the ground, as you see here. This creates a kind of theater act or theater set with a backdrop that changes. Clouds, leaves, cars, actors passing through the stage, changing shape, forming unexpected adjacencies. Therefore, on the exterior, the envelope displaces the surrounding environment into a new reality construction. The window reveals are also clad in mirror, stainless steel to displace the depth of the envelope with the lateral view of the landscape. As you see here, that's what you see frontally, and the lateral view kind of projected on the window reveal. Unlike the window reveals at the Whitney or those at the Yokohama Art Center, two beautiful museums, but that emphasize weight and framing the exterior as it is. The window reveals at MoCA dissolve the sense of weight and act as devices of displacement, displacing the lateral spaces into the front, generating new landscapes throughout the day, revealing new relationships. The mirror reveals introduce the experience of the reality shifting, that it never stops. The mirror jams also engage the sky, and specifically light as an activating agent. As the sun moves, as well as clouds, they create an almost kaleidoscopic effect of optical doubling and transmutation. The view down never stands still. And the phenomenal quality of these elements of the museum have a magical double quality to them. They are simultaneously reflective and absorptive, and sources equally of light and shadow. They ensure that the museum defies the sense of permanence, which of course is quite different to another museum of a similar scale, the Herschel Museum in Washington, D.C., which is also freestanding, but evokes a sense of weight, atemporal, and monumentality. The different faces of MoCA's envelope catch the light differently and develop different colors, and appear as if they are separate faces resting on one another. At night, this perception is created by the large triangular glass window face, making the interior appear hollow, and the opaque surfaces leaning to support each other. MoCA's shape changes with your points of view as you move around it, as a consequence of the geometry of the building. In order to grasp its nature, you must project yourself through it. From certain points of view, it appears flat or skinny, and others, deep prism-like form that engages one's perception as it is at odds with its extruded neighbors. Nearer to it, it is the orientation of its rhomboid faces and the apex of its 6 triangular faces that vary one's experience. 4 triangular faces rise from the pavement to a sharp apex against the sky. Here, one's focus is lifted upwards. 2 triangular faces descend from the parapet to the ground and brings one focus down to the street level. Here are some photos of people entering a museum. A kind of apprehension comes across of entering a new place. They're a little awkward, perhaps too, as rotating doors can often be, in order to explore the museum interior as a space which is not the reality outside. A kind of surface tension is introduced between the interior and exterior faces of the envelope, as if they are inversions of each other. Here is an image of the International Surrealism exhibition in Paris, designed by Marcel Duchamp. As a way to reject the modernist white wall galleries, he experimented with inverting the interior as exterior, and up and down within the space to position art as an antidote to reality. At MoCA, the envelope is a kind of semi-monochrome structural skin comprised on the exterior of a vented stainless steel rain screen over an internal structural steel metal decking, which acts in combination with the steel superstructure framing, forming a rigid structural skin together. Whereas its vented rain screen exterior is designed with black mirror stainless steel, which is so to transmit lightness and the transitory and scalelessness. The interior metal cladding and steel framing are left exposed and painted in a very deep fire-resistant paint, which you need if you're exposed to the structure, to invert the interior as an exterior. The blue color wraps around and all over the museum spaces, reinforcing curatorial continuity and vertical interaction that the slanted walls already provide. But it also subverts the idea of the white gallery, where the art seems to float and has no weight. Historical art museums on the left use color to mitigate against the aging white in old paintings. However, the intense color at the back of the paintings take the weight away from them. Therefore, the paintings appear light and again float. At MoCA, the contrast between the dark blue ceiling and the light walls and floors introduce a sense of orientation into the gallery and a sense of weight, which in this time is on the lower area of the room where it's brighter and on the artwork. The blue is sufficiently dark, which is something that we have to obviously experiment and discuss with artists and curators, as clearly it was a risk. Is sufficiently dark to recede and introduce an effect of boundlessness, like an extensive sky over the galleries, for the same reason Egyptians painted ceilings of their tombs in deep blue. MoCA's dark blue ceiling generates the illusion that the inside is outside, and the weight is certainly on the art. Here are portraits of the members of the public on the very first public opening day of the museum. A strong feeling comes across. It is a kind of enhanced engagement with the art. No one, I think, can say they are distracted by the blue because they are not in the white cube. It is as if the dark ceiling acts like blinders, eliminating distraction from peripheral vision, allowing people to really focus. Now, the museum sometimes blocks natural light completely, with the sense of by these walls, temporary walls, when the sense of boundlessness of the ceiling becomes more active and perhaps the space is more passive. At other times, the arrangement of the temporary walls reveal the perimeter blue walls and natural light flows in. And here, space becomes more active, engaging with the art. At night, the building is almost mute, with the exception that the mirror reveals displays, slices, and I think you can just about see slices of the artwork to the street. as I mentioned, Mocha's ambition was to become a living room for Cleveland, and this was always a question to us throughout the project of how to interpret this. So perhaps we could say that the idea of living room is a place where people will converge, which feels like their own, rather than, say, a Cleveland outpost of MoMA. And in this case, in the case of Mocha, this is explored through creating a building which is not a white cube, and which is unique enough to be Cleveland's own, unique in the way it is, dialogic, transmits transience, boundlessness through a single building. And I will finish with a smaller, a much smaller and only interior project, but I think quite challenging. The Victoria Beckham flagship store in London, where we were asked to design the store interior as well as the displays for clothing, accessories, and the eyewear. Now, given that brands have become, have now an online platform, including Victoria Beckham, that provide customers with ample choice, we asked, what if the store is not designed as a market, but a gallery, where the focus is not on choice, but on how people view things and the context within which that viewing occurs? What if the clothing display brings an element of transience rather than permanence, and a sense of exploration to customers, both of which surely underpin fashion? What if the accessory displays too are not fixed permanently, as you see here? To shift the store from a market to a gallery, the shop front is designed as a simple glass frontage with no display. The store entrance door, a concrete door, is cast as a negative of one of the windows of the Georgian terrace above. It slides open to give people access to 3 floors within. Now here the ceiling of the different floors is used kind of strategically. The top floor, the upper floor, is designed with a lightweight concrete waffled ceiling to provide a sense of upward expansion, and it's difficult normally to get people to the upper floor. Whereas the ceiling of the ground and the lower ground floor are clad in mirror stainless steel, you could say to lead to their disappearance through reflection, or possibly to create an illusion of double the height. The use of coffered ceiling in art galleries has, of course, a long history. Its function has been to hide services and house the lighting system. Also, the depth serves to deaden the sound, an acoustic function that is really important when the space is made of only hard surfaces. Used in the store, the coffered ceiling not only conceals the mechanical and electrical resistance, but it is also used to invert the fixed closing system into a mobile one or movable one by hanging it from chains on tracks. The clothing becomes soft walls in the space that can be moved to different locations or entirely removed to reveal or to convert the shop into an event space almost in a flash of a second. Therefore, the ceiling integrated with the hanging system brings, I would say, customers a sense of transience rather than permanence, and a sense of exploration. They can move things, they can turn clothing 360 degrees. Now, when they are moved away, that wall that you see there becomes a space for projections, for events. The oblique geometry of the ceiling is then used on the lower 2 floors to animate the simple rectilinear spaces of the other floors to large triangular cuts, make room for staircases that communicate levels, whereas the first floor ceiling transmits weight, as we saw. The ceiling of the lower floors, as they are clad in mirror stainless steel, creates this optical doubling of the actual height of the spaces. They also double the stair on themselves and turn it into a room of its own. An event space where the store can hold talks, shows, and displays. Now, the the accessory wall for handbags located on the entry floor is also designed to change over time. Its long shelves are retractable to allow the store to vary the amount and height of the handbags on display, or to completely remove them from view to allow the space to become another event space. This will change the perception of this space, of course, over time. The counters, which is another element in a store, are designed in mirror stainless steel to turn them from floating objects to objects that are immersed in their surrounding. Their experience is therefore, one could say, inseparable from the space that surrounds them. The seating in the store is also designed as a system of triangular benches that can be combined in many different ways and be moved around for the different scenarios that the store will take. Here's a small assembly, as you enter. Here's a larger constellation on the first floor, as well as the lowest floor. So, in my opinion, here our agency as architects was to challenge people's experience of the fashion store by shifting the concept of the store from a market of choices to a gallery. The Victoria Beckham customers are instead provided with a space that transmits temporality, flexibility, and unpredictability instead of rigidity, permanence, and predictability. So really just to finish my discussions, I guess, earlier of style, I would say that style needs to relate not only to formal elements and what you represent, but to how elements are assembled, specifically to engage people's perception as they engage their everyday life activities. And in that context, the agency of style is to inspire individuals to interact with their activities in new and different ways. Thank you.
With the fluted glass, black building, I see an example from different buildings.
Speak a little bit louder.
Sure. The fluted black glass building, I've seen an example of a larger scale concave glass, and it reflected the light and magnified it to the street level, and it like burned up a car. So I was just wondering if you looked at some of the physics behind fluted glass and tried to solve that problem.
No, I mean, you know that there has been a recent history of a certain building in London.
Yeah.
That, so I think it's unavoidable. I mean, now it's one of the first things that comes up in the conversation. So we have looked at it, and we're not designing it alone. We are surrounded with a larger team of experts, I say. And we have looked at it, and so far there didn't seem to be concerns. I don't know, maybe it has to do with the fact that we are concaving, not convexing. I'm not sure, because the building that did burn a part of a car in London was convexing. So perhaps that's partially the reason. I'm not sure, but there are many things. The problem with glass is, of course, how not to produce glare to pass in traffic, how not to focus the reflection so that it would burn houses or cars, how not to make the interior too dark, how not to gain too much heat. I mean, there are this very simple and seemingly very simple has a complex science around it, and if you start giving it any kind of fancy geometry, you make it even more complicated. But I think that's what makes it exciting.
One more general question. Much of your project began with an introduction of historical precedents, and then an argument continued off of subversion. So I'm curious, when is it okay to accept convention?
I think you make conventions all the time, but we owe it to ourselves also to break them. I mean, conventions, architectural conventions are made by architects, so we are responsible. But we rewrite history all the time, and I mean, a big part of the study book is very much about this, of accepting that the very foundation of the discipline, if you think there is one, is accepting that there are conventions, but these conventions are constantly expanding. Some are being thrown away, some are being developed, and that's actually part of the world of experimentation that we are in, that unless you want to just not experiment, you would simply repeat. I think there is a cultural dimension to the problem of just accepting conventions, which implies that you give people the same thing, and that you turn them into people who are more passive and that who simply accept their environment. So I think it's important that to accept conventions, but simply to question them. But also to accept that you don't have to question everything from scratch all the time. I mean, they are all, we've tried, and of course I'm sure another architect would have picked other kinds of elements. We've chosen to question certain conventions for certain reasons. We could pick others. But the whole premise, I think, of the work is accepting that there are conventions. You could, of course, I have been asked at other lectures before where, why do you just throw them all away? It's like, you're designing a car and somebody tells you, why don't you make it fly? And many people have one day cars fly, but probably between cars driving on the road and flying, there are transitional moments, and we've got to kind of go through them, and eventually, maybe they fly.
Okay.
You don't have to.
Just keeping it in check. It seems like sometimes the breaking conventions in your building system is about doing a sort of accepted function like a private balcony better in an unconventional way. And that has like a fallout of creating these unconventional spaces which lead to unconventional ways of having apartment. How often are the kind of like conditions that create like unconventional uses, like the curving apartment shapes, just kind of like a fallout of doing an accepted function better?
How will you make it better? I don't think it's about making it better, it's to make it different. So I think it's about creating difference and not to create better, because I think better is very subjective. And if I was designing it just for myself, for my parents, I will know probably what we think is better. I'm not sure if I know what an entire world thinks is better. You try to make the best judgment you can, but I think ideas need to be broader. They need to be much more elastic, and they need to be, I don't think they should be so exact in the way they're trying to determine things that then they risk being very exclusive.
Thank you.
Thank you.